Dr. Ruby Payne, welcome to Chapter 3 of Emotional Poverty 2. Now, if you're a secondary teacher, this is going to be of great interest to you, or if you have an adolescent child. One of the things, in my opinion, is that we really don't understand very well as educators what's actually going on in their brain. Yes, we know about puberty, and yes, we know that they have the hormonal surges, but the actual job of the brain during that time is fascinating. So the chapter in the book, Chapter 3, we start out looking at puberty basically. And one of the things that's fascinating about puberty is that if it comes too early or it comes too late, it's really related to adverse outcomes. 2 years before your peers or more, 2 years behind your peers or more, it's not a very beneficial thing. 2 years before your peers, for females, it's early pregnancy, early sexual abuse, failing ninth grade, a course in ninth grade or two. For males, it's early criminal activity, either gang activity, drug activity, early sexual activity, failing a course or two at high school. If you're 2 years behind, it's related to cutting, it's related to decreased performance. So it's a key issue there. And one of the things that happens when you go through puberty is that your brain is actually now, the hormones have changed, your brain is restructuring itself, and your reference group is no longer your parents, your reference group is your peers. And these are the jobs you have. It's kind of like there's a theater going on here. And behind the scenes, behind the curtain, your brain is really working very hard to develop social dominance, social cognition, perspective taking, a moral code, and dealing with your reward risk system. Part of what's going on here is that social dominance comes to the table. Now, I want to be careful how I talk about this because there are people who say this is sexist, but the reality is it's as old as time. One of the studies that I cite in the book is that an interesting study they did with lobsters. Lobsters are very smart, and lobsters are 350 million years old. And what they did is they took a lobster from one place and then a lobster from another place and relocated them into an area where there weren't any lobsters. And they watched how they reorganized themselves socially and what happened. And basically what you see in social dominance is who's going to be the alpha male, who's going to be the queen bee, okay? And it becomes a hierarchical ranking system among all primates, among humans. And the reason it becomes so critical is that it is related to resources, protection, and inclusion. So it is a fight for who can do that. And basically, among males, the dominance has to do with physical strength. Basically, among females, has to do with physical attractiveness. And so what you will see is this game gets played out in middle school all the time and high school. And one of the reasons for bullying, particularly among females, is that the hard research is that females who bully have more friends and they know people they bully. Males who bully have fewer friends and don't know who they bully. And females, it's not the most popular females that bully the most, it's the one right below that. And it's about social dominance. The second thing you have to do is social cognition. And social cognition is, how do I get along with people? How do I know who they are? How do I read their nonverbals? How do I assess the situation? And it is very much a social interaction, and it becomes critical for this reason. If you don't develop social cognition, then it becomes very difficult to have intimacy or a relationship, and then you become socially isolated. And social isolation, in terms of the social determinants of health, is very bad. It's as bad for you as cigarette smoking. And you tend to die earlier than your peers. And so it becomes this critical issue. How do I work around that? And part of social cognition that you're developing is perspective taking. In other words, How do I know how this other person feels, and how do I do that? That ability to literally walk in somebody else's shoes allows you to have better relationships. You are developing now a risk-reward system. And drugs, porn. One of the things we know, addictions, one of the things we know is that your brain is rewiring. And if you rewire to a screen rather than to a human being, then it creates all kinds of issues. So I'm going to speak candidly for 3 or 4 minutes about porn. And if you want to research more about this, you can, okay? But if you look in your book on page, you have a chart here, it's page 61. You have a chart about porn. And basically 9 out of every 10 adolescent males and 6 out of 10 every adolescent female watch porn. Study out of Stanford University found that the average adolescent male watches 50 porn clips a week. Now here is the issue about it. When they watch porn young, okay, just as an aside, your brain is rewiring, so it is whatever fires together, wires together. So if you learn about sex on a screen, you have literally wired your brain to a screen. And what happens when they watch porn? Typically, they masturbate. And one of the things is, as you do that more and more, you need more and more stimulation. So what you do, it's not unusual that you have multiple porn clips on your screen at once. What happens then if you do this repeatedly? It's not unusual, and it doesn't happen to everyone, but it's not unusual in the mid to late 20s that you have difficulty with erectile dysfunction. And the solution then, up to this point in time, is to reboot. In other words, you do without porn and you do without masturbation for a period of time till you can function naturally. One of the most interesting things in the research is this. If you had your early sexual experience to human beings and then you developed a porn addiction, usually rebooting is what it's called. Rebooting takes 6 months, whatever, some more or less, okay? But if you wired your brain to a screen, then rebooting takes 2 to 3 to 4 times longer for you than it does if your initial wiring was to a person. The reason this is such an issue is this. If you can't develop a relationship, then you can't have intimacy, and then you're socially isolated. And then it is, as I said earlier, the social determinants of health are in the mix. So as we start thinking about our students, one of the things is there's this prevalent notion out there, oh, you just grow out of it. But if you read Atlantic Monthly, there was a professor who wrote about the fact that it's so problematic now. She works with Gen Z in college, and she talks about the fact that many of them only know about sexual activity through what they've seen in porn. And so if they do what they see in porn, then many females are not interested in being in that position again. And so what happens is that they don't want to be involved. In the hard research out of Great Britain, they looked at about 1,500 adolescent girls who were Gen Z. 30% of those girls said they never want to be married, and 35% said they never want to have children. So what you're talking about is isolation in the long term, but it's a huge issue on the risk reward. And whether it's drugs, whether it's porn, it's still activating that part of the brain. One of the most interesting things about it is this. Adolescents will not take risks if there's one other adolescent with them. But you get 2 adolescents or more, and then they take risks. And it's one of the reasons why the driver's licenses in so many states now state that if you are learning to drive, you can only have 1 adolescent in the car with you and no more. and it's because of this risk-reward analysis. And then we look at moral development, how you develop morally your moral code, and part of a moral code is dependent upon your ability to do perspective taking. And so interestingly enough, this is the activity that's going on in an adolescent brain, and we in the schools often don't acknowledge it. In fact, we work to negate it. And so there's several strategies in this chapter about how you go about helping develop that in a productive way.